B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Thursday, January 10th, 2019. Today, we open the podcast with references to 3 important investigative journalism reports, none of which came from a corporate media outlet. I'll bet you're shocked by that. I do want to celebrate reporters who, against a lot of odds and bucking the corporate tide for, high-paid positions where you trade access for going soft on government officials, for example, there is a whole breed of people who believe deeply in the First Amendment, in what I would call capital J journalism, and who pursue the stories they write without fear of the powerful or the consequences. So we lead today with the next installment, the second, in Max Blumenthal's reports about this amazing information campaign that is run by a British group called the Integrity Initiative. The Integrity Initiative is linked to another organization called the Institute for Statecraft. And after some hackers in Europe surfaced some documents that exposed this group, Max Blumenthal went to work. And today's installment is co-bylined with Mark Ames. And Mark Ames is related to Pando, the Silicon Valley investigative journalism unit where I first connected with Yasha Levine. So Mark Ames and Blumenthal tell us more about this information campaign coming from Britain. And it is apparently being imported into the United States. Now, they tell us that we need this Integrity Initiative to fight Russian disinformation. But it appears that the antidote to Russian disinformation is British-manufactured disinformation. And as Blumenthal showed in the first installment, the British used a disinformation campaign to squelch the appointment in Spain of a man to run their intelligence operation. And that's just one example. So I do want to jump to the end of this installment. It's published at grayzoneproject.com, and I have a link in the show file for today's podcast. I also saw at Consortium News that the first installment was picked up by editor Joe Laria and is available for readers there as well. But what we learn at the end of today's report is that the guy who surfaced in the first report, this is a British fellow who showed up in the United States and volunteered for Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. The man I'm talking about is Simon Bracey Lane. He appeared in Iowa and volunteered for the Bernie Sanders presidential primary. Yes, he did. And now he has returned to the United States as the advance man for a military intelligence cutout that specialized in smearing left-wing political figures like Jeremy Corbyn in Britain. Bracey Lane spoke to a group at a conference that was held in Seattle, explaining that Integrity Initiative, its director, Chris Donnelly, had been unable to make the meeting, possibly because he was bogged down in scandal back home. Now, the comments that have been prepared for the leader there, Chris Donnelly, indicated that he was going to say that the West is no longer in a peacetime, rules-based environment. And Simon Bracey Lane expanded on that in a Q&A session where he said we have to change the definition of war to encompass everything that war now encompasses, referring vaguely to various forms of hybrid warfare. Quote, "There's a great deal to be done in communicating that to young people. When we mean being at war, we don't mean sending our boys off to fight. It's right here in our homes." Now, I find this fascinating. And I believe that Max Blumenthal is working feverishly to get more information on Simon Bracey Lane. But it appears that he may have been planted, a spy for Britain in the Bernie Sanders 2016 campaign. So there is more to the story here. It is fascinating because this fellow Donnelly, who I mentioned, made a trip to Washington where he is building contacts to import the Integrity Initiative to the United States. One of the first people he met with, according to documents that are published here with the article, was Sebastian Gorka. Remember him? He's one of the many people who has transited through the White House under Trump. He is the bizarre guy with Austrian roots, or I guess Hungarian roots, and identifies with a fringe neo-Nazi group there. Sebastian Gorka's wife, Catherine, is an official in the Department of Homeland Security, and Gorka himself has this perch where he does a daily commentary that is required to be broadcast by every single Sinclair TV station across the country. And he serves up warmed-over Trumpisms, love for the president, right-wing talking points. It's pure propaganda. So it's not surprising that a propagandist like Chris Donnelly would put on his agenda the top item for his visit to Washington last fall was meet Sebastian Gorka for breakfast. So this suggests that this British program, which was used to smear Jeremy Corbyn as an anti-Semite, which I believe was used to promote the disinformation around the alleged Skripal poisoning scandal in Salisbury last March. And this is a thread that I think Max Blumenthal should keep pulling on, and we'll see what it reveals. Now, I have scheduled an interview with Blumenthal about these issues for next Monday, and I look forward to chatting with him and bringing that podcast to you. Next on my investigative series is one that I first mentioned back in December. It is a deep investigation into now retired California Governor Jerry Brown and his givebacks, giveaways, and vetoes for the interests of big oil here in California. And this report, I interviewed co-author Derek Seidman, tells us about Lucy Gikovich. Now, back in the 1970s, when Jerry Brown was governor the first time here in California, she was his executive secretary. Well, fast forward, after 2000, she became a lobbyist. She lobbied Jerry Brown as mayor of Oakland, and he hired her as Oakland's lobbyist in Washington, D.C. Then, when he became governor, she signed on with an outfit in Washington called Crane, and she lobbied Jerry Brown on behalf of Phillips 66 and many other members of the oil and gas industries. Here's an excerpt from my conversation with Derek Seidman.
I think that Jerry Brown is trying to have it both ways, and he can't. He can't simultaneously be a climate hero and have that as his legacy, while he really refuses to take on, in a more aggressive way, the industry that more than anything else is causing our climate crisis, which is the oil industry. The California legislature passed, this was in 2016, in response to the Aliso Canyon disaster, which you just described. The legislature passed AB 2748, which would have given victims of the Aliso Canyon disaster more litigation options to sue SoCalGas. So SoCalGas in 2016 subcontracted Lucy Gikovich to lobby the governor's office directly on that bill. In her lobbying filing, it says very specifically that she was lobbying the governor's office on AB 2748. And shortly after she was brought on as a lobbyist, Brown vetoed the bill. And in a subsequent quarter, she was paid $50,000.
Mm-hmm. I invite you to listen to the full interview with Derek Seidman of the Public Accountability Initiative. They're based in Buffalo, New York. And I note in the interview that no California-based journalist broke this story. It took an expert on oil and gas, Derek Seidman, to tease out the connection between Jerry Brown and lobbyist Lucy Gikovich. The interview is available today for subscribers at iTunes, at TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, and, of course, our home base, peterbcollins.com. Now, just as I was getting ready to come into the studio to record today's podcast, I checked my email, and I got a flash from Bo Hodai. Bo Hodai is a highly credible, very talented investigative reporter. He's the guy who helped expose the Stingray surveillance system. You know, the one that fakes a cell tower and requires every nearby phone to check in with it and dump its contents, including allowing for eavesdropping on live telephone calls? Well, today he sent me links to a 2-installment series published by the Phoenix New-Times, and he exposes how the son of billionaire oligarch Warren Buffett has set up his own vigilante operation along the border in Arizona in Cochise County. Howard Buffett, age 64, has armed a private volunteer group, imported privately employed enforcement personnel, funded the chemical defoliation of a substantial portion of the county's border with Mexico. He has purchased the loyalty of the local sheriff. He's gone through, he's done this through a steady stream of gifts and grants, totaling tens of millions of dollars, buying helicopters and other gear for the sheriff. So this is an authorized vigilante operation. And I have linked to Bo Hodai's article for you to review. I've only read the first 4 or 5 pages, but I will digest it completely tonight and hopefully have more for you on the podcast tomorrow. So Trump is at the border for the photo op that he told news anchors the other day he wasn't very excited about. In fact, he said they had twisted his arm and told him he had to do it. So he's in McAllen, Texas. And, of course, the photo op includes people who work the border protection units. And, of course, they include token members of minority groups to make the photo op look good. But here's what's bizarre. On his way out the door to the helicopter before he flew to Texas, Trump once again renewed the threat that he might declare a state of emergency in an effort to bypass Congress in funding his bloody wall. And he said, well, you know, if this doesn't work out, probably I will do it. I would almost say definitely. But then when he got to McAllen, he said, you know, during the campaign, I would say Mexico's going to pay for it. Obviously, I never said this. Huh? And I never meant they were going to write out a check. I often stated one way or the other, Mexico is going to pay for the wall. Now, this is the biggest, most blatant lie that even members of his base have got to be able to comprehend. These morons went to his mob rallies, and he got them to chant, "We're going to build a wall." And then he would ask, and who's going to pay for it? And they would all chant in unison, Mexico. Now, there have to be hundreds of video clips of Trump saying that we're going to build a wall and Mexico's going to pay for it. It was the most repeated claim that he made. It was the one that was most amplified for free, billions of dollars worth of free media from the corporate outlets during the 2016 campaign. But I will bet that members of his base just say, oh, that's Trump. You know, he's just saying what he has to say. We know that he wants Mexico to pay for it, but we don't really care about that. And we don't care if he lied to us about that. And so this is the world we live in, where 40% of people responding to polls say they strongly support Donald Trump. Half of Republicans say they strongly support him. Most of them go along with his wall idea. And most Democrats, it's the polar opposite. Now, if he does pursue this claim of a state of emergency, legal scholar Marjorie Cohn, retired now from San Diego's Thomas Jefferson School of Law, writes at Truth Out today that under U.S. law, the president cannot usurp the spending power the Constitution grants only to Congress. Trump would be on shaky ground if he were to declare a national emergency, and the precedent is when Harry Truman, during the War on Korea, invoked national security to seize the steel mills in order to block a union strike that would have shut them down. Truman claimed authority to maintain steel production in support of the war effort. But the Supreme Court held that the seizure was not supported by the Constitution or any U.S. law, and they articulated in the decision standards. They said in the absence of a grant or prohibition by Congress, the president can rely only on his own powers. He acts in a zone of twilight where he and Congress may have concurrent authority or their distribution of power remains uncertain. In this area, any actual test of power is likely to depend on the imperatives of events and contemporary imponderables rather than on abstract theories of law. Now, the second test, it's actually the third of three here. I skipped the first one. When the president seeks to circumvent the expressed or implied will of Congress, his power is at its lowest ebb, for then he can rely only upon his own constitutional powers minus any constitutional powers of Congress over the matter. Presidential claim to such power must be scrutinized with caution, for what is at stake is the equilibrium established by our constitutional system. And Marjorie Cohn also points out that any attempt by Trump to declare an emergency would violate the Posse Comitatus Act in ordering the military to function inside the borders of the United States. So she concludes Trump cannot successfully declare a national emergency to evade the Constitution's separation of powers mandate. But that won't stop him from trying. And we can expect that he may carry out this threat, and then it will just wind its way through the courts and ultimately reach the Supremes. And it's hard to gauge how they would evaluate the president's claim of the risk, the threats, and the need for action absent the approval of Congress. Now, I want to thank listener Fred. Yesterday, he emailed me a link to this 4-minute clip that I have linked to in the show file for today's podcast. It's from a Western TV show, a cowboy TV show from 1958, and the show is called Trackdown. The star of the TV show is a con man named Trump, who comes to town, says that the world is going to end and that only he can save them. Let's listen to a little bit of this. We see the flag of the Texas Rangers, Frontier Company.
I bring you a message few of you will be able to believe.
This is Trump.
A message of great importance. A message I alone was able to read in the fires of the universe. But be not afraid, my friends. I also bring you the means with which to save yourselves.
Save us from what?
From the end of the world, friend. Which I don't expect you to believe. But the rest of you, those who want to be alive tomorrow morning, I will tell you tonight. Remember that. Bring your friends here. I'll tell you tonight so that you will be able to prepare.
What are you selling, mister? Snake oil?
The world will come to a flaming end at midnight tonight. Without my help and knowledge, every one of you will be dead. Got a name?
Trump.
I bet it fits. Planning to remain in town for long?
Well, I understand I have until midnight.
And you've heard.
Yeah, I heard. Your name is Trump? All right, Sheriff. How long are you going to put up with this?
What do you mean?
How long are you going to let this con man walk around town?
Be careful, son. I can sue you.
How about it, Sheriff? When are you going to put the lid on?
What for?
Well, stealing is stealing, whether you do it with a gun or a mouthful of mealy words.
I don't intend to sit here and be insulted, Sheriff. If your people don't want my help, I can go elsewhere.
Now, wait a minute, Mr. Trump. You don't talk for the rest of us.
Since the sheriff wouldn't stop Trump, Hobie had to find somebody who would. Sheriff Chet Farrow was the gun law in Talpa, and Judge Clement was the book law.
So I will link to it. As I said, it's on YouTube. I encourage you to check it out. The full clip runs just a little under 4 minutes. And it is so Trumpian, right? The con man, only I can save you. And if you doubt him, he'll sue you. He tried to get up from the table and walk away, just like he did at the White House with Pelosi and Schumer yesterday. Fred, you made my day. Thank you very much. And Fred, get in touch. I would like to offer you a free subscription. I don't believe Fred is currently a subscriber. If so, I'm not aware of it. And for that submission, I'd be happy to set you up. Now, there are great people who subscribe every month, like Don Cisney, Paul Lacombe, Jeff Lipinski, Sandra canceled. Sorry, Sandra. And Julie Dupree has been a staunch supporter for a long time. I invite you to join in, for the cost of a hipster coffee or what have you. You could be supporting me at $5 a month. $10, $20. Those are your options when you land on the sign-up page at peterbcollins.com. And the easy direct link is peterbcollins.com/sign-up. And I also offer the $50 annual subscription with bonus gifts. My latest bonus gift is John Dist's rock and roll CD called American University. And I'd love to send you a copy with a new annual subscription and a mailing address in the continental U.S. Billionaire oligarch. I'm gonna explain in a moment why I've adjusted my language here. Tom Steyer, based here in San Francisco, made billions in hedge fund activities. He has been threatening to run for president. He was out in Des Moines, and that's where he dropped his decline. He said, "I'll be dedicating 100% of my time, effort, and resources to one cause, working for Trump's impeachment and removal from office. I am not running for president at this time. Instead, I'm strengthening my commitment to need to impeach." And he said he will kick in another $40 million. That brings it to almost $100 million that he has spent on TV ads trying to build popular support for impeachment of Trump. And just this week, Steyer spent over $2 million in TV time in key primary states like New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Now, the reason I am modifying my language is that listener Jerry Frescia, who's an expatriate who lives in Italy, he emailed and he relayed a tweet from Glenn Greenwald, noting that in the United States, we don't call our billionaires oligarchs. It's only bad Russians who are rich who we use that term for. And so I'm going to, whenever I talk about a billionaire, I'm going to either include or substitute the term oligarch. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Warren, running for president, said that campaigns that are funded by billionaires, whether it goes through super PACs or their own money, should be denounced. I just mean people should not be self-funding. She's not saying that Mike Bloomberg can't run for president, but she doesn't want him or Tom Steyer, now that he's bailed out, but she didn't want him to try to buy the office. And over the weekend, Bernie Sanders inveighed against the billionaire class. Left-wing activists heckled Bloomberg over his wealth when he visited Iowa last month. The wife of Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, journalist Connie Schultz, and Brown is rumored to be considering a presidential run. She put out, I think this is a tweet, it's a brief message. She said, "I want a man who wants to buy himself a presidency, comma, I've thought, precisely never." You get it. So, the oligarchs are active, and I find this curious in the New York Times story that cobbles together these different comments attacking the rich. This is a rich comment. "Anti-billionaire populism is convenient for both Warren and Sanders. Neither has the financial wherewithal to fund their own campaign." And that's like I saw on Facebook, somebody had posted a quote from the AP that was trying to be even-handed about the government shutdown. And it said, on the one hand, Trump is allowing the government shutdown to continue because he can't get $5.7 billion for his wall. And on the other hand, the Democrats aren't giving it to him. Those are not equivalent. And I think that's pretty clear. Mike Pompeo is on a Mideast tour, 12 stops, running up his frequent flyer miles, I guess. He went to Cairo and pointedly rebutted a speech that Obama gave there 10 years ago. One of his quotes, "The age of self-inflicted American shame is over." Now, if you recall, Obama's trip preceded the Arab Spring by 2 years. He went to Cairo, and under the watchful eye of military dictator Hosni Mubarak, he basically apologized for American missteps in the Middle East, like the invasion of Iraq. And that was seen as an apology tour, and Obama was slammed by the right wing and the people who were hiding their racism. And so Pompeo decided that he had to provide kind of an antidote to Obama's comments. The full quote: "The good news is this: the age of self-inflicted American shame is over, and so are the policies that produce so much needless suffering. Now comes the real new beginning. The nations of the Middle East will never enjoy security, achieve economic stability, or advance the dreams of its peoples if Iran's revolutionary regime persists on its current course." And in the speech, he basically repudiated Trump's claim that we're withdrawing from Syria. He said, "We're going to be there until the last Iranian boot is off the ground." Other quotes from the speech, he, again, slapping back at Obama, he said, "Obama told you that radical Islamist terrorism does not stem from ideology. He told you 9/11 led my country to abandon its ideals, particularly in the Middle East. He told you that the United States and the Muslim world needed a new beginning. The results of these misjudgments have been dire. In falsely seeing ourselves as a force for what ails the Middle East, we were timid about asserting ourselves when the times and our partners demanded it." Wow. That is quite a statement. And it shows how shameless Mike Pompeo and his boss, the Donald, really are. Now, when it comes to Turkey, they're very angry at the U.S., including Pompeo, and the Prime Minister has announced that Turkey will launch its offensive to slaughter the Syrian Kurdish forces if the U.S. delays the withdrawal of troops from Syria. So Trump, with his compulsive or impulsive tweet, the one that I agreed with, that we should get our troops out of Syria, well, the manner he has done it and the way the deep state has moved in to correct his blunder and to repudiate his decision, it's truly stunning. Pompeo also dropped in on Baghdad, where he told them that the fight to counter Iran is real and important, that he is there to ensure the lasting defeat throughout the region of the Islamic State, and that he is trying to separate Iraq from Iran, which is not going to happen because our failed occupation of Iraq forced the Iraqis into a kind of a coalition, or at least a friendly neighbor relationship with Iran. And, of course, we never state that the whole reason that we do all this is at the behest of the State of Israel. And Trevor Aronson at The Intercept is reporting that despite Trump's tweet and the indication that we are ratcheting down and preparing to exit Syria, that since the tweet, the U.S. military has ramped up its bombing offensive against the Islamic State in eastern Syria. Aronson notes that between December 16 and 29, the U.S. conducted 469 airstrikes, consisting of over 1,000 engagements in Syria, conducted 9 strikes consisting of 14 engagements in Iraq. And our corporate media doesn't report this at all. Because Trump tweeted and the government shut down and Pelosi had a bad facelift. I mean, it's just mind-boggling how the corporate media malpractice continues day after day. And finally, from this article, Aronson notes that at least 221 civilians, most of them women and children, were killed by our air raids during November of 2018. Some apologies have been issued. Bernie Sanders issued a formal apology today to the women who worked on his campaign in 2016, acknowledging that there have been multiple reports of women who were harassed, women who were not paid equal to men, and other slights to the female sex. I think it's a little late, but better than never. And Lady Gaga tweeted today her own apology, it was actually last night, for working with R. Kelly on the song she released in 2013 called Do What You Want. Now, I'm not that familiar with the song, but she says that it's a result of a rape incident that she herself endured. She writes, as a victim of sexual assault, I made both the song and video at a dark time in my life. My intention was to create something extremely defiant and provocative because I was angry, still hadn't processed the trauma that had occurred to me. She said, I stand behind the women, the accusers of R. Kelly, 1,000%. And I haven't seen it, but there is a lot of coverage of the new docuseries Surviving R. Kelly. And he has managed to continue to work and to avoid legal consequences for a string of credible claims of sexual abuse, having captive relationships, and sex with underage females. And finally today, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has slammed on Twitter the right-wing online publication The Daily Caller, a day after they published a fake photo of her nude in a bathtub. Now, I haven't seen this picture. I don't really traffic in nude selfies and that kind of stuff, but apparently it has been outed for over a month as a Photoshop concoction. And AOC said that this is just another example of how women in leadership face more scrutiny. And she said the actions of the Daily Caller were just a matter of time, given that Republicans had been frothing at the mouth all week. And she criticized the Daily Mail, that's a British tabloid, which she accused of sending a reporter to my boyfriend's relatives' homes, offering them cash for dirt. And in a later tweet, she lamented the completely disgusting behavior from conservative outlets. No wonder they defended Kavanaugh so fiercely, she wrote. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. I've got Roy Rogers and Trigger ready to play us out. You can find this podcast on YouTube. I hope you'll share it far and wide. And I am still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling